So as mentioned, this is going to be recorded. I'll also post these slides to the address that you see there, prototopics.blogspot.com, as well as in future, I'll post updates to the models that I'm constructing as part of this discussion. And the other thing I'm going to mention at a point in time here, something related to an etchings clinic. And I'll post that information to this blog as well when that will be conducted. It'll also be online, so anyone can attend. But I'll mention that at the appropriate time here. And I'll also post the information once it's scheduled to my blog too, so you can follow it there. And I'll share it with Russ so that he can communicate it directly to all of you if you're interested as well. Okay, so any discussion of early welded freight cars probably should start with sort of a level set of what freight cars looked like at that point in time. Most of the cars, as you can see to the cars on the left here, the Pennsy X38, which was a proprietary 50-foot design. You had an AAR design, which was similar dimensionally. It was quite different structurally from the X38. And then you had another version of the AAR design with channel section structural members, so it was slightly different. But they all had roughly the same unloaded weight of about 55 to 56,000 pounds. At about the same time, and actually a few years before, Milwaukee had started experimenting with welding for 50-foot car and 40-foot car construction, the familiar ribside cars. And you can see the average weight unloaded of those cars is significantly less than the comparable riveted design cars of the time. And you know, that of course equates to how much you can put in the car for any given cubic capacity. So the more weight you could take out of an unloaded car, that allowed you some extra weight to use should you load out the maximum allowable weight of the car. And then just for comparison, and we'll be talking about this more in a second, here's an X40, which is a Pennsy welded proprietary design. This is a 60-foot car, and it's still several tons lighter than the riveted 50-foot cars of the era. So there are obvious benefits to welding. You know, and you might ask why it wasn't just wholesale adopted as soon as these cars came out. The capacity to weld equipment really didn't take off until during the war, and obviously during the war there were restrictions on who could build how many of what. So it wasn't until the post-war period that welding as a sort of a viable freight car construction technique really took off with things like the PS1, and you had a lot of tank cars that started using welding. But certainly the proof was there that it made sense from the perspective of structural integrity and lighter weight. So here's a little table of some of the early Pennsy welded box and auto cars, and I cut it off with the X48, which were the 20 Holman standard PS1s. You can see that, you know, by Pennsy standards, these were not huge classes. You have 1,500 X41Bs and 1,500 X43As. But, you know, when you think about the quantities of things like X29s and X31s, et cetera, these were still relatively modest numbers for Pennsy. You know, obviously for other railroads, they would be considered large, but it still was a fairly small portion of the fleet. So I'm going to go through here and kind of highlight what each of these cars looked like, and you know, discuss some of the features of each of them before talking a little bit about modeling. And by the way, as you can see, the background image that I have here is of an X45 after it had been repainted in the mid-50s. But so the first class I'm going to talk about is the X36, which was a single car, and it used welding for a lot of its construction, but there was also a heavy component of riveting, which was not uncommon at, you know, early in the experimentation with welding. it was car number 103500, and it was a typical 40-foot car. Dimensionally, it was very similar to the 1937 AAR boxcar of the time. It had a 10-foot inside height and 9-foot 4-inch inside width, so 3,800 foot cubic capacity. Obviously, it's a highly unusual looking car, as you can see here. It had these closely spaced ribs that I'm sure, given that it was early in welding technology, they probably overbuilt for this, and so that's why you have so many of those ribs. And they're also external to the car body, whereas if you think about most cars of the time, you had the sheet steel on the outside, and any structural members were behind them. So this flipped that around a little bit. Here's a photo of the other side of the car, and you notice that there's a couple differences. You have all of the reporting mark, car number, the capacity is on this plate here. The Pennsy keystone is also on a plate attached to the side. You still have that plate with the capacity information, but you notice they used a much smaller keystone and painted it right on the side there. Here's a view of the interior of the car, showing the roof as well, and then these end panels. The roof was proprietary design, which was fairly uncommon at this point in time. You had already seen widespread adoption of a few standard prototypes, including the Murphy rectangular panel roof that you see on most cars. And the ends, by this time, most car manufacturers and railroads were using dreadnought ends, and there were a couple other types, but this is completely proprietary to the Pennsy. You see you have these ribs that are welded to a piece of sheet steel. They're more closely spaced at the bottom, and that was, makes a lot of sense because shifting loads were more apt to damage the bottom of the end of a car than the top. So you would make it stronger closer to the floor of the car. And this is a universal power handbrake that's on this car. These cars, this single car, was in service. It earned its keep, so to speak. And here's a photo of it in 1951 at Trenton. Still with the same paint scheme. It was last reweighed at Altoona in August of 1950. So still growing strong 15 years later. Again, it's only a single car, so it's, if anything, it's kind of a footnote, but it's interesting that, it was out there and photographed. And then just for comparison's sake, you look at the X37, the 1937 AAR boxcar, and then the X36. And again, you see a marked weight reduction through the use of welding for construction of the car. It's not as pronounced as on the 50-foot cars, but it's still a couple tons versus the 37 AAR car. And just for reference, the X37s were fairly archaic in terms of design. The Pennsy seemed to really cling to certain standards, and they were extremely heavy cars by the standards of the mid to late 30s, and that's reflected in a 48,000 pound lightweight. Moving on to the X40, and this is where you start to see some real shifts to welding for almost everything. You had several different groups of cars. The X40 was 10 cars. The X40A cars were pulled from that X40 group, so collectively the X40 and X40A were 10 cars. You had 100 X40Bs and then one X40C that came from the X40 group and was modified. And these, again, were completely proprietary in terms of design. Excuse me, this is a photo of the X40B, and I'll point out a couple traits here that also carry over to the X41. The cars were extremely similar in terms of their design characteristics. You had this very, very large, heavy side sill that you can see here. And then at the top, the side plate, and what the side plate is on any box car is it's usually W or Z section where you have a flat surface that's at the outer portion of the top of the car, either in front of or behind the side sheathing, and then it would angle in towards the car and go up, and the roof eaves overlap that. What's really interesting about the X40 and X41 family of cars is that that plate has a distinct angle to it here. So it has a unique appearance in that there's a distinct slope below the roof eaves, and then it flattens out at the top of the side, but it again is much larger than a typical side plate. And then you have a lot of proprietary elements to these cars beyond just the sides. The sides were comprised of these very narrow panels welded to structural members behind them. They're typically 24 inches wide, except at the ends they were narrower. The two end sections, these were improved dreadnought ends, were welded where the top and bottom panels met. And you can see that weld line here. The underframes on the X40 and X41 were proprietary designs, and I'll get into that a lot more when I talk about modeling. But just understand that your typical AAR boxcar had a distinctly different underframe. One other thing that's kind of interesting, and you might not notice it if you're looking at a model, but all of these side sill support sections, the long section under the doors, this little tab here, the tab at the bolsters, and then the tab where the ladder and side sill connect there, they were all inset from the side sill by a fraction of an inch, but it's quite visible here, and it's distinctly different than you would see on a typical AAR boxcar of the time. Here's a side photo of another member of the class, and you can see how large these door openings are. These were typically used in automobile, and some of the members of this class were used in merchandise services. This is an 18-foot door opening overall, which even on a 60-foot car is quite pronounced. I put this photo in here just as reference that the Pennsy did experiment with large automobile cars. You see this X30 car, which I believe, if I remember correctly, was a one car class used for delivery of fire engines. But again, Pennsy had some experience with cars like this. The other thing of note here, these cylinders that extend down from the floor, those are floor tubes. And when cars had automobile loading equipment in them, racks, which is signified by this white band on the door, when the loading equipment was stowed, the chains that were associated with that would be stowed in these tubes, so that the floor would be unencumbered and the car could be loaded with anything if the racks were stowed. Here's a photo of one of these cars in merchandise service. Again, 60 feet long. This was primarily for LCL service. Has that familiar merchandise scheme that we see also on the X41s. And they used ASF A3 ride control trucks, which were at that time becoming standard in terms of being the most common freight truck in use at that time. And then one other thing to point out is these cars use the Murphy rectangular panel roof. So even though the design of the car overall was proprietary, Pennsy was making use of commercially available roof ends, trucks, etc. And then here's a corner view. Again, you can see a lot of the same design traits are shared across the automobile car versions. A couple things I'll point out. These are Youngstown corrugated doors. At the time these cars were built in 47 and the X41s as well, you had a transition from this, what's called a pre-war style door, to the post-war, which I'll show you on some other cars. And so you see a mix of different types of specialties, such as doors, where some of them are more modern than others. And then, like most Pennsy cars, they had these large cast truss plates, which you can see right there, just to the left of the ladder. Here is a version of one of these that's painted in the familiar Keystone scheme. This one has a stencil return one empty to PRNL, Carneys Point, New Jersey. And here's another view of that car. One interesting note about these ends also is they had the short top rib, which was not all that common. Erie was another road that used that as well. It's interesting because these cars are taller than most other cars at the time, so they could have extended the rib all the way to the corner. My assumption is that this very large side plate probably would have interfered in some way with a clean weld there, so they truncated that rib. So moving on to the X41, which, as I alluded to before, is a shortened version of the X40. These were built in 1947 and 48 at Altoona. They're very, very similar to the X40. They're just 10 feet shorter, and there were a lot more of them constructed as well. You had the first group was the X41. It was 290 cars. They had 14-foot 6-inch door openings, which is an automobile car configuration. The X41A was very similar, 200 cars. They also had end doors. And then the biggest group of cars were the 50-foot box cars with 7-foot door openings, the B subclass with 1,500 cars. And then there were another 500 C-class, which were double door auto cars as well. Everything was proprietary. This is a photograph, or there are similar ones. I have a few different versions of this photo from slightly different angles, but this shows one of the X41Bs, which is the box car, in merchandise service. This being color really shows off that scheme as well, how everything was painted. One thing that you may not be able to pick out here, but this particular car had Chrysler trucks, which was a not widely adopted prototype, but it is very distinctive. It had a like a ride control snubber on the outside of the truck bolster. If you're familiar with the General American 50-foot cars that were painted green with the yellow bands, that's the same truck that those cars had. I'll mention as sort of a side note that Plate C released a very nice 3D printed version of those trucks, so they are available. So if you are modeling one of these cars in merchandise service, you can get the correct truck for it from Plate C, which is now part of the 3D Central group of companies that 3D Central's 3D printing for. One other thing to note here, I mentioned, you had certain specialties. This is the improved Youngstown door that was introduced in the post-war era. And some cars received this, some cars received the pre-war door. This thing you see below here was not that common until the post-war era, but there were some railroads, Santa Fe being the most prevalent, that used this. It's a device to take up slack in the brakes, and this particular one is called a Royal Type F. It was probably the most common for a period of time. If you are familiar with the KD PS1 box cars, they all have this on it. When you're looking at it from the side, you can't miss it. It's quite distinctive seeing it hang down like that. The other thing that I'll mention is welding of cars introduced this sort of waviness in the panels. And that's something that's, it's very hard to miss, and it's very hard to model. I know that Yarmouth Model Works introduced some box cars several years ago that have that feature. I think it's a little bit heavy-handed in their cars. I've been working on some ways myself to try to do that a little more realistically, and I'll talk about that a little bit more too, but it's there and it's quite noticeable. So if you can find a way to replicate it, it's a really effective modeling technique, particularly when you weather a car and light hits it so that you can see that. Here's a photo of a just regular freight service car in 1951. This car has the improved Youngstown door that I was talking about. Some of the cars had these, the cars that were in freight service had this Pennsy proprietary truck design. As I mentioned before, some of them had the ASF A3 ride control trucks. What I really like about this photo is that the way the light hits it, you can really see how these side sill support structural members, the underframe components tie directly into them and wrap around them top and bottom, which is something that you don't often see captured in models, particularly in HO scale. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the modeling discussion, but it's just worth noting. And then here's a version of one of those cars that has the pre-war Youngstown door that I alluded to, and ASF A3 ride control trucks. Highlight here also, it has the superior power handbrake, which was not that common, but if it's something you want to add, the Chicago Northwestern Society bought the tooling from Red Caboose and offers these from time to time. So if it's something you wanted to replicate, they do have them. The reason they have it is Minneapolis and St. Louis use those almost exclusively on their boxcars. And then here's a photo of one of these cars in Penn Central service. This is by the 70s. There have been a few changes, most notably the running boards have been removed. You can still see the brackets for the way the running boards mount. That's a part that Plano offers. There's some additions to the top of the door there. And the ladders have been shortened down as well since the running boards have been removed. Here's a shot of an X41C, which is an auto car version. Pre-war Youngstown doors. You get a really good view with the way the light is hitting that truss plate there. And I'll mention at this point, from a modeling perspective, the Sunshine cars for the X41s have a kind of a blank plate there. And I've been experimenting and I've found a way to print legible trust information. So I'm going to be putting that on my model, and I'll probably be making some form of PRR trust plates available for purchase that contain the right information for various classes. And then here's one from that same class after it had been painted, obviously. One thing to note, the Pennsy, unlike a lot of railroads, was fond of putting their root card boards along the side sills or below the side sills. You can see that here. And the placard board is on the door here. Most railroads had the placard board here and the root card board here, but Pennsy preferred to keep it over here. And here's a shot of one of these cars from the 50s. It's obviously been repainted. It shows to very good effect the waviness in the side panels due to the welding. It's really pronounced. And then another one much later. This is, if I remember correctly, this is in the early 60s. Again, you can really see that waviness in the side panels. Has the pre-war Youngstown doors, ASF A3 ride control trucks. And this is a really effective photo. And I'll show this again in the modeling section of one of the X41Cs. What's interesting about this underframe, since it's one of the automobile cars, is it's slightly different than the X41B box car. The biggest difference being on the box cars, they had crossbearers. The auto car here has a crossbearer here and a crossbearer over here. The box cars had a second pair of crossbearers in the center of the car where the doors were. So I'll show you that as well when we get to that. And the Society does have drawings available for these classes. So if you're interested in pursuing the modeling as I describe it, these are things that you can get your hands on to help with that. And then here's an X41E. This is a car that had the door opening widened, and you can see it had a second door added here. You can also see this auxiliary door that was added is slightly wider than the main door that was there. And then here's one that made it to Conrail service. This is an X41F, which was an X A subclass. The end doors were sealed on these, so those didn't operate anymore. One other thing I had mentioned before, but the lighting in this photo really shows it off. You can see just how much the side sill, the side sill support and the sill step ladder supports there are inset below the side. There's a pronounced offset there that the light really captures in this photo. The X42s were built during the war. I'm sorry, not during the post-war period. These were also welded. They were for express service, so they don't show up in the equipment registers. But given their welding and the heritage, where Pennsy was building a lot of welded proprietary designs at this time frame, I thought I'd include them here just as reference. These were 60-foot cars. You see that they had single pairs of doors on the sides, which presumably made it easier for loading and unloading of express baggage and package traffic. They did have roller bearing trucks, which, given their service and passenger trains, that made perfect sense. Here's a photo of one with a different paint scheme, and they were built in 50-51. Oh, I'm sorry, going back. I wanted to mention there was an article about these cars by Chuck Younghurth in Railroad Model Craftsman, and it did include drawings if that's something you wanted to reference yourself. So I highly recommend you can get that, or there are people who have that available and can share it with you. Okay, so the X43A cars, this is when Pennsy was starting to purchase cars that were both AAR standard as well as still continuing with small quantities of proprietary cars. This particular group of cars was part of the much larger X43 family, and all of the other X43 subclasses were riveted AAR design cars. These 1,500 cars were all built by American Car and Foundry, and they were entirely welded, and they followed the AAR design standards. So the sides, the ends, the roof, everything followed that, as well as the underframe. So these were kind of a shift for the Pennsy in terms of adopting AAR design cars. This particular group had 12 welded panels, which was common at that time, 6 on each side of the door. They had 7-foot door openings, improved Youngstown doors, diagonal panel roof, AAR welded underframe. One interesting thing about these is they received the National C1 trucks, which were not widely adopted. They bear a very striking resemblance to the ASF A3, if at first blush, but this the area around the truck spring package was quite narrow compared to the ASF A3, and the way that this the bolster fit into the truck side frames was different than the ASF A3. I mentioned that also because this is another truck that Plate C has introduced, and I've been working on and off on patterns for kits for these with all of the various things being accurate, and so I was able to consult with Plate C on these trucks. Here's a good photo of most of one of these cars in service. The real reason I included it here is you can see the contrast between the sides and the roof. And these cars had a black roof, so they were coated with car cement, and that's not very common for Pennsy cars, particularly before the time period that these were built. So if you're a modeler of the early 50s, having a car like this with a black roof is kind of a striking thing. And then here's a shot of one in 1955 in Brooklyn that's been repainted. Again, this really shows that wrinkly nature to to the side panels that's so distinctive and so evident when you look at it, but oftentimes very hard to capture. One other thing I wanted to mention here, this little thing right here is a defect card holder. And it's a detail that is easy to miss, and it's only on the right half of the car. And sometimes you'll see them mounted like on the side sill tab at the bolsters here. There are different types of these. This was like a round tube one. Some of them were more rectangular with like a lid. Sometimes it was nothing more than a wood board. But the function of these was if there was something with the car that needed to be worked on, a journal box needed to be fixed, the door was jammed up, anything that required a repair, that information could be put into the defect card holder so that the crew knew to pull the car and take it to the rip track. Again, it's a small detail, but kind of interesting one. Also with these cars, you notice they put the root card boards on the doors by this point. And here's a shot of another one, also in the 50s. You can really see how evident the truss plates are on these particular cars. And then just for sort of comparison contrast, here's an X43B, which is a sister car. These were entirely riveted. These followed the AAR design characteristics for the post-war boxcar, except that they had 10 riveted panels, diagonal panel roof, improved red knot end with rectangular corrugation at the top there. These are something that you could fairly easily model using a branch line car. But yeah, there were a lot more of the riveted design cars than there were of the welded ones, but nonetheless, there were 1,500 welded cars, so it's not entirely, a footnote. There were a decent number. The X45, this is kind of one of my favorites. These were built at Altoona in 51. There were 500 of them. It was a 50-foot car with an 8-foot door opening, and it was a proprietary design. And if you sort of took a very quick look at this car, you would easily could think that it was just a 50-foot AAR car with welded sides, diagonal panel roof, the 4 ends with a rectangular corrugation at the top, and the 2 panels welded together. And that's kind of what I thought when I first saw photos of these. And then I started looking at the details along the side sill. And the underframe on these cars is, the sides are proprietary too, but the underframe is extremely proprietary if that's a thing. And they, you have sort of a side sill support here where the door track is attached to it. And then behind it, offset, there was a secondary one. These are, this is a unique underframe. And it's, to me, as someone who's really interested in freight cars, both design and modeling, that's an extremely cool thing to be able to replicate. This is another one that I've been playing around with, and I've mostly completed the sides and ends to make patterns for these for kits. All of this stuff here will be etched, and you'll be able to really create that separation and see an appropriate amount of daylight between those two components. But it's a really interesting car. Now here's a shot of one in service in the upper Midwest, and again you can see that that offset secondary sill support there. The other thing that is not as easy to see, and yeah, you can get a good view of it here. If you were to look at this member here that joins the structural cross member to the bottom of the side sill, if you were cut straight through it from the front of the car, it's a T-section in shape, with the sort of the leg of that T facing outwards. And again, that's something you just don't see in car design. So there's a lot of characteristics about these that are really quite distinctive. This is a shot of one in 56 that's in auto parts service. Again, you know, the wrinkling on these is really quite pronounced. There's braces up against the door posts there that are quite distinctive. It's cars like this that really kind of get me excited about, you know, modeling, because I'm more a modeler than anything else. So seeing something like this is really kind of gets my mind going about how would I replicate these things. Here's another shot of one. This is even later. This is in the 60s. This also is in auto parts service. It's in a pool that is operated by the New York Central. It says return when empty to New York Central, Fulton, New York. And here's a shot of one of these from the 70s. I love about this. I'm also kind of a geek about lettering and getting lettering on cars as accurate as possible. I think the Pennsy, you know, the calendar numbers were some of the most attractive freight car lettering that's been done. And unfortunately, it was so short-lived that not many cars received it, but this particular car did. So here's a car number that you could conceivably use if you built a model of this car, and the time period that those numbers were in use was so short that it's pretty easy to narrow down when the car would have been repainted. And here's one that made it to Conrail. The running boards have been removed. The ladders are shortened. They, you know, put the handhold across the end here, but it made it all the way to Conrail, and presumably, you know, came through Penn Central, since this lettering style is Penn Central. And then the last prototype car I'm going to cover is the PS1. There were 20 of these built. It's not by any means a big class of cars on the Pennsy. They were built during that period when calendar numbering was in effect. It was early '54. This was a small group of cars that were built with a cushion underframe, and several railroads bought small lots of these cars from Pullman in this era, around early '54. There's an article in Mainline Modeler that profiles some of the roads that bought them. Western Pacific had some as well in a really attractive scheme. They were primarily put out there for service that would benefit from having a cushion underframe, and also the logic was that Pullman was trying to test that to see how it would function in that type of service. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about modeling. We probably have about 15-20 minutes left. So, and I'm focused on HO scale because that's really where my modeling interest is, and I have the most expertise about what's out there. The X40 has been available from Rail Classics, and I think those still show up on the secondary market. The X41 Sunshine did most of that family. They're obviously difficult to come by now, but I think there were enough of them on the market that they show up pretty regularly on the secondhand market, and they, you know, don't seem to fetch like vinegar car prices. So if you want one, it's something you can usually get your hands on. The X42 was offered by F&C, quite nice model. I alluded to the fact before that I'm working on the X43 and X45 to offer as kits, and I've come up with a way that I think is a really effective technique for representing that welding without it being over the top. And then the X48, you could do a kit bash with a KD model using the Mainline Modeler article to do the underframe. And my assumption would be that there's probably some information in the archives as well, either in the Society or at the Pennsylvania State Archives, that would help you with the underframe. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm doing right now with an X41. I have a Sunshine kit that I've had for several years for the boxcar version, and this is sort of I usually, when I'm building a model, I like to find a car that I'm going to focus on and make as my model. So this particular one was in a consist. This is a small New Haven train on the branch between Waterbury and New Britain, Connecticut. This is one of the New Haven's F5 consolidations. And this is an X41B that's in the consist. It has an Ajax power handbrake, the improved Youngstown corrugated door, Pennsy design trucks. One thing about the door, the improved Youngstown door in the Sunshine kits, when they were released, it was based upon the CMBT car shop's door. If you can get your hands on a branch line improved Youngstown door, I think you'll find that to be a lot better in terms of fidelity to detail. So what do I have to do to make this model? So there's some certain things. The first is the underframe, and I didn't know this until fairly recently, that the underframe in the Sunshine kits is based upon an AAR type underframe. So it's almost entirely wrong out of the box. And I would also say that I'm very focused on modeling a few cars extremely accurately as opposed to having many cars. So your tolerance for these things might vary. I'm going to show you how to do all of these things to the absolute nth degree of detail, and you can kind of pick and choose as you see fit. The grabs on these cars, the X41 family, were all proprietary in terms of how they mounted to the car. There's nothing out there commercially that matches the way that these mounted. The ladders are spaced differently just because of the car design. So you could probably find a ladder that works. I made my own. I'll show you how that's done. And then things like the side tabs and the sill steps, the door frame brace I'll mention, and then some other details that are not on the Sunshine car that I'll talk about as well. But there's a lot to do with these cars. So here's kind of highlighting some of the things. This portion where the sill steps and the ladders mount was a piece of steel with two bends at each end, and they sort of look like wings after that 90-degree bend. That was something that I thought would be visually interesting to replicate on these. The draft gear braces that you see here, these are not accounted for in the Sunshine kits. These grabs here, the two on the end sill are drop grabs, but they mount to something that's typical of like a bracket grab. So even though they look like drop grabs, they have a different mounting than a typical drop grab. The uncoupling device, this bracket for that is fairly typical, but the way it mounted, it's a piece of flat strap that was welded to the bottom of the end sill and then extended down. That's fairly easy to replicate. And then this bracket grab over here also was of a different configuration than the typical bracket grab. This is a view from the other side. It gives you some a way to visualize these. And here's that wing I was talking about on that sill step tab there. The stringers, the ends of them actually had flat steel that bent around them that was welded to the bottom of the end sill and also welded to the end of the stringer. That's something you don't typically see on cars. Again, these brackets for these grabs are different than pretty much any other prototype, as well as the side ones here. The right-hand brackets for these are fairly typical standard ones. If you're familiar with the KD bracket grab, that's what it looks like. But the left ones are actually a Z shape if you look at them in profile, which is not something that is available in any fashion commercially. Here's the top of the end. I mentioned before truss plates, all of that information can be read, and I have a way now to replicate that in a legible format in HO scale. I didn't call it out, but the way the running boards are attached, there's actually the strap doesn't just come out and wrap around the roof beams. it actually goes down and then hugs the roof and then comes over the roof eaves. So it's slightly different than a typical arrangement. Since I'm doing etched parts, I did the brake step supports and the handbrake housing bracket as well to be included in those parts. And then some of the other things I'm attacking, all of these tab sections you see highlighted in red arrows, I'm removing all of those. I'm going to leave the one under the door and the ones at the bolsters, mostly because I feel like it's easier to just go that route. These two pieces here, one is what I'm calling a doorpost support. It's basically an angle bracket welded to the side there and then welded up against the doorpost. That is not terribly well rendered. And then there's door locking hardware here. And you can see, I don't know what happened to the mold with Sunshine, but it's really just a blob. It looks like the mold tore or something and it just got filled in. So I just scraped that material off completely. And I made an etching for this. And this here is just steel door hardware from a commercial door. And then since I'm not making entirely new side patterns, one of the ways I thought that I could impart a little bit of waviness is to mask each panel and using an X-Acto blade like this, scrape a little bit of material in several places in this panel, and then in the adjacent panels, do it in an alternate area. So you get sort of that checkerboard effect that you see with the waviness in the panels. I'll keep you posted on how that comes out. So now back to the underframe, and this is where I've done most of my work to date. There are a lot of things here that need to be considered. These cross-bearer cover plates, they're welded to the underframe members. I've never seen a cross-bearer cover plate with that shape, with like this little knob at the end there. The stringers running from here, from here to here are a 5-inch stringer, 5-inch Z with 2-inch legs. That's a shape I've never come across. Most Z bars that railroads use are sort of standard 3 and 4-inch. So this is an entirely unique shape to this car. I've never seen a 5-inch Z like that on an underframe. And then from here to the bolsters, and then from the bolsters to the end sills are more standard 3-inch Zs. So there's differences in Zs that need to be accounted for. And then the cross members, you have cross bearers here. There are cross ties, and then there are narrower channel sections here and here. So there's a lot that's different about these underframes. And again, this is kind of something that I get really excited about. So I tend to invest more than the average person might. So this is the artwork that I drew up for this. These are all of the what will be bent to be the Z bars. These are the side sill support tab sections that I referenced. These are those corner pieces for the sill steps to attach to. These are bolster cover plates. These are cross-bearer cover plates. I did ladders, and I did extras of pretty much everything. One thing I did with the ladders that I'm going to do in my kits going forward also is I've actually made a jig for each individual ladder. I know that can be very frustrating for people who are assembling etched ladders to have to find a jig that makes, that they can work with or do it by hand. These ladder styles will drop right in place. You hold them in place at the top and bottom, and then you just drop each rung in place and assemble them that way. It's quite a bit easier, I believe. These are all of the brackets for attaching the grab irons and such, as well as there's more over here. These are the sill steps. I did brake levers here. These are the grabs that go on the bracket parts. Other details here, like those draft gear supports. These are the uncoupling lever supports. There's a few other things mixed in here too. And this is what it looked like when I got it back from PPD. It's a company in the UK that is quite reasonable to do personal etchings with. And as I alluded to, I'll mention it again here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Hindsight, which is it's like a virtual RPM that some friends and I started during COVID. Generally, those are Saturday affairs, and we still do them twice a year now. We were doing them every 6 to 8 weeks during COVID. But sometimes for a longer subject, we'll do them on a Wednesday night. And so I'm going to do sometime probably in the early fall, a clinic just about creating artwork for etchings. If you're interested, I'll post it on my blog. I'll also send that information along to Russ so he can share that with any of you who might be interested in kind of seeing how I did this as a follow-up. And then this is, what some of these parts look like. This is that sill step bracket all bent up. This is a cross tie bent, and you can see there's a couple different angles that it must follow, and it sort of takes some experience to get working with this, how these things are all going to come out and everything. But I put the hole in place there for the train line. This is what's knocked out on the bolster cover plate that you saw in the photo of the underside of the X41C. It's kind of cool when you get this back to start being able to play with it. So one thing that a lot of people have some fear about when building resin models, flat kits, is how do I get that body assembled? And so what I generally do is I'll tack the two sides of the car back to back, aligned lengthwise. And sometimes that alignment isn't, you'd think it should be perfect end to end, but sometimes it's actually, you're going to get things to line up better overall and make detailing your model to have a little bit of overhang at each end if it means that like the door openings align or the bolsters align or things like that. But it's very rare that if you have two sides of a boxcar that they're exactly the same length, and they're both square. So what I do is I'll glue them together in a couple spots back to back, usually 4 spots, like one here, and then on the other, the bottom of the casting as viewed from here, a couple other spots with just ACC. And it's very easy once you're done to pop that apart with an X-Acto blade. And then I'll take a black permanent marker and I'll just paint that entire edge. So this edge and this edge, I'll use a Sharpie and I'll just run black over it all so that I know that when I'm done with my sanding, I'm done when I can't see any of that black on the outer surface that I sanded. And I put that black on there, and then I put it into the True Sander, which is a Northwest Shortline product. Many of you have probably heard of it. A lot of you probably have it. And I always put the straight edge up against this fence here. So when I'm done with this edge here, I'll flip the whole thing over so that this top edge is against the fence again. And then you're carefully kind of gently pushing it against the edge here. And then you run this block back and forth, which has sandpaper on the face of it, and it removes material. And then you have, not only are the length of the sides exactly the same, but they also have a square edge now, which makes assembly that much easier. And then I glue the body together, sides. I'll glue, this side to this end, and then this side to this end. And then I take those two assemblies and glue the opposite corners. It's very important to get the top of the side and the top of the end aligned, because that's where people are going to see gaps between the roof and the sides or the ends if that's not clean. So I always aim for that to be the part that I want in alignment, is the top of the sides and ends. I know some people use clamps and put blocks on the inside and various things like that. I haven't had to do that yet. I'm very careful about the way I put these together, and it seemed to work out. But if you find that you have more success with clamps or gluing, like 1/8 inch styrene square to the inside of the car or something like that, or Lego blocks, whatever works for you. But getting the sides the same length and square is really important. So here's the a little bit more on the underframe. I post this photo in here again, just for some references. I'm going to be adding the train line. I've got cross bearers to add here. Can you still all hear me okay? My headphones went out. Somebody give me a thumbs up.
Yeah, we're good, Ted.
Okay, good. Okay. So I built the bolsters from scratch, and there's sort of a continuum here followed by the arrows. I started with, I have to check my notes here. I started with 10 by 156 pieces here, and then I glued 10 by 80 strips here. So it's a sandwich here, but the goal is that I have to match this angle from here to here. And so what I would do is cut along this edge and cut along this edge to get to here. This is that assembly flipped over. And then I took and added pieces along the ends here that didn't have the same thickness. Added a portion in the center here, which is 125 thousandths that's sticking up there. And then to make the actual, this middle piece, that's 90 by 156, I believe, wide. And then I have this excess sticking out at the top. That ends up being the basic bolster assembly. If somebody is really interested in, getting all of these, what all of those strips are, I'd be happy to share that. You can post a comment on my blog or reach out via the Speedwitch site. There's a contact form there. But that was the assembly. And then inside here at the bottom, I added, that is a 30 by 80 strip in each here that kind of keeps that spacing along the length of this portion consistent and really kind of solidifies it. So those are the bolsters on the car. The other thing, the center sills, I actually cut custom. And the way that I make custom strips is I'll put little spacers at the edges, and then you can just butt a steel ruler up against that. And then butting that steel ruler up against it gives you a consistent width strip. And I make custom strips all the time doing that in things all the way down to 5 thousandths styrene. And, strips that are like 2 scale inches wide. It works really well, and it allows me to get exactly the strip that I'm looking for. And that was to get a center sill that was 135 tall. So these center sills here are 135.135 inches tall at that point. And then these are the etchings you see here. And so, and I write all over my models, as you can see here. I'm not shy. That stuff's going to either get sandblasted away or covered with paint. Couple things I wanted to point out with these etchings. When I made the etchings, I include little notches here because I still have to add the center sill flanges that go here. And all of that's going to be covered by the crossbearer cover plates anyway. So, but that just makes it easier for me to fit those the center sill flanges in there. And the center sill flanges, I believe, are going to be 10 thousandths by 60 thousandths, which is a little bit wider than the prototype, but the center sills are also, thicker than what's on the prototype. These are the 5-inch Z-bars that I alluded to. Again, you may not care because this is on the underside of the model, but you may have a place in your modeling where you do want something that looks like that, right? Like you can see, if you were holding this model, you could see the underside of that Z flange, which is the way it is on the prototype. You might be building a model of a structure that has some really detailed architectural accents or something like that. If you can etch them, if you can draw that and etch them, they're going to look fantastic. So this has more applications than just sort of the underside of a freight car. The other thing I wanted to note is these cross bearers actually extend past the floor. And the reason for that is that these are going to have those side sill tab sections go around them, whereas these are just going to be hidden by the side sill sections under the door. But these will actually nest in exact replicas of the side sill sections. And then I also etched the holes in there for the train line. So this is where the underframe stands right now. I got the etchings only this week. I thought I was going to get them last week, and I thought I would have had all last weekend to put more work into this. But I have the 4 cross bearers in place. There's 6 pairs of these 5-inch Z sections, and then from here to here, there will be pairs of 3-inch Z-bar stringers, and then they'll also have them at the end. And then there will be cross ties here, here, and here on each side of the center sill, and then channel section cross members here, and then obviously a lot of additional detail to go there, and then all of the things on the side, etc. But I'll continue showing this information on my blog as well. And so this is where the updates will be on the blog. At this address, and I thank you. And again, also the etching clinic, I'll share that information in future as well, so that if you're interested in learning about that, there are a lot of applications for things like that, for things like locomotive parts, window frames, structure details. I mean, you name it. Etching is a really, really strong way to do things, and it's easy to learn how to draw it. It's not 3D, it's 2D. And there are many tools that you can use to do that. And the company that I've been working with, PPD in the UK, is extremely helpful at kind of getting you across the finish line if you have questions and need to understand how to make things. So thank you. And I guess if we have questions or anything like that, I'm happy to answer.
Any questions on that?
Sorry?
Okay, couple folks want to speak here, but Ted, this is Russ. When you have a chance, send me any links and details. We'll add it to the website, and when the YouTube video gets posted, we'll include it in the details also. I don't know if
okay.
I think Steve Stafiri wants to say something.
Yeah, so just for point of information, the X40 and the X40B was made by Oriental in the 80s, and they're relatively easy to find.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Gus Minority would like this contribute.
Hi, Ted. Just a couple quick questions. Like on the a lot of freight cars, they have the large tack board on the door and the smaller board below that. You mentioned that smaller board was like a routing. You said.
Yes.
Can you explain? Can you explain like what would have what kind of instructions would have been on the large tack board and the smaller one?
Yes, so the large board might have something like do not hump, or open other side, or glass, handle with care, things like that, or if there was some dangerous goods or something. The root card board might have something like a train, like the railroads would actually print out like train number things for online common routing, so they might tack on a 32 so that they know that needs to be routed to train 32, or refrigerator cars might have icing instructions that would go either on another board of a similar size or that board. If there was routing going for, let's say Pennsy to Wabash to Nickel Plate, that information would go on a root card that would be tacked to that board. And things about what things about like the commodities that could, if it was clean for a certain type of commodity, there were cards for that could go on there as well. yeah, it's a variety of things, but if you look at most cars that are out there photographed, they have those on there. They can be replicated with little bits of paper. And Owl Mountain Models, he's in Nevada, has actually produced decals for accurate, like, root card things that would be on there. Yeah.
So I guess like the larger board, the customer will put that on, I imagine, and the smaller one, the router itself will put that on and route it for routing.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else?
Have a question? Any questions online?
Any questions online? Otherwise, we'll break. Ted, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And again, send me the links and we'll share the video and link to your blog spot.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. We're
Thanks.
ready to, oh, go ahead, Ted.
No, I'm all set. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, so we're gonna break and have our dining car. We'll resume at 1 o'clock with the business meeting. And I'll see you folks in a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ted, you still there?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're quite welcome.
Your presentation was outstanding.
Thank you.
You know,
Passion.
I'm a father and I do modifications on some cars, but nothing like you do.
I'm passionate about it.
Yeah, like wow.